Alpine Liquid Fertilizers is your full season crop fertility specialist from start to finish. Visit alpinepfl.com for more.
Thank you to our show sponsors, The Wheat School, Mind Your Farm Business, and FMC Pre-School. FMC Pre-School is an education and stewardship extension of FMC Canada with a firm mandate to bring educational value to you regarding proactive weed control and resistance management best practices. Learn more at fmcpreschool.com. Hello, all, and welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. That was quite the little ditty to kick off tonight's broadcast. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, of course, right here on time. Pete says I'm a minute late, but he's wrong. Yes. Okay. So, as always, if you collect those CEU credits, make sure tomorrow morning head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. You can let us know you took in the program and we'll get you those CEU credits. And while you're there, check out any past episodes you may have missed. And you can sign up for our email. That newsletter will go out to you ahead of time, let you know what's coming up, and drop you a reminder that we're going live on Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern, as always. So check it out, realagriculture.com/agronomists. All right, tonight we are going to talk about profit from the spray pass. We're going to talk about efficiency gains. We're going to talk about effectiveness, all sorts of great things. And well, if we're going to talk spraying, you know that there's at least one name that's going to join us. And I've got a special treat because we've also got Mike Cowbrough with us too. So we've got Tom Wolf with Agrimetrix and Sprayers 101 and Mike Cowbrough with OMAFA. I've been told I can't say OMAFA anymore, so I'm going to say OMAFA. Tom joining us from Manitoba today, a special treat. Mike from the very blustery Ontario like I am. So Mike, I'll start with you. Fresh off a couple conferences, I would assume. How is the winter show season so far?
Yeah, it's been a good start to the winter meeting season. And talking to a bunch of my colleagues that get around as well. I think the mood and atmosphere has been surprisingly positive, even though we're in a period of not great commodity prices, right, and not a good outlook on that front. But yeah, we're in the heat of it, and overall, I think it's a good time of year. People are generally positive, looking towards the spring and what they can improve upon and try out.
Assuming we don't blow away. For anyone who doesn't know, here in Ontario, we are under what producer Jay would call, a basic breeze by Lethbridge standards, but rather blustery here in Ontario. All right, Tom joining us from sunny Manitoba, or is it friendly Manitoba? I always confuse those two. Tom, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Now, what keeps you busy this time of year?
Yeah, it's extension season, so it's also trade show season. So Manitoba Ag Days was last week, and that was very good. And the crop production week before that, of course, Agri-Trade kicked it all off in November. But we're going to keep going. Lots of interest in things like drones, for example.
Hmm. Which we are, I don't, well, I guess we could maybe touch on that tonight. It's definitely one of those questions that I know last year got a lot of attention. I'm sure we'll see more of it this year as far as applications with a drone for seed, etc. But Tom, do we have any updates on pesticide applications by drone?
So far, the only pesticide that is of agricultural relevance is Garlon XRT, which is imazapyr. It's an industrial registration, not an agricultural
Right.
registration, and it is for the control of woody perennials in rangelands and rights of way. And it
Okay.
has been on the market since the beginning. But we do not anticipate, believe it or not, agricultural pesticide perhaps for another year.
Okay. We shall keep tabs. We're not going to hold you to it, Tom. You could say whatever you want. But I would probably agree. No, I don't think anyone's holding their breath. And maybe that's okay for all sorts of good reasons. Okay, but tonight's topic, the way I want to frame this, and there's for a few reasons, and Mike, you've touched on one of them. I think for many, we're asking questions about in a potentially thin margin, no margin, or less margin than we're used to environment. People look to save money potentially, maybe cut down on costs. But one of the ways, of course, we can save money is by making sure that the products that we choose to use actually do the job we want them to do. And that is sort of how I'm framing this look at profiting from the spray pass. There's a lot of things that go into it. For the questions for everyone watching, we are going to spend quite a bit of time on weed control and herbicides. But of course, Tom can answer plenty of your questions on just application in general. And Mike will do his best on all the other agronomy topics, right, Mike? You like other things
Sounds
too.
good. Yep.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we'll start there, Mike. One of the key things I think that we do touch on now and again, but probably bears mentioning, is to get the efficacy result out of the herbicide that we want. There's several things that go into it, but the weeds themselves that we're targeting actually can be part of the problem. So, are there examples of specific weeds that make it more difficult to make sure that herbicide works like it's supposed to?
Yeah, so the short answer is, of course. If I could take just a step back a bit, one of the things historically, as you kind of look past when you get into eras of lower commodity prices and kind of looking at ways to slim some input costs, the one area that I would not advocate cutting on is weed control, mainly because the impact of yield loss is so high in the majority of field crops, number one. And so then relative to the price of the actual program, the return on investment is quite high. So, the discussion around like cutting rates and maybe, bypassing a trip through the field, I think, those are things I wouldn't advocate for. Like to your point, how do you maximize the benefit of what you're using? And this is not rocket science. It's pretty basic stuff. Like when you look through the literature and, performance of herbicides on weeds, there's of course a lot of variability, and it's very much species dependent. Is usually the starting point. So the more kind of what you're dealing with, right? We're going to have 4 to 5 species in a field that we probably are of any significance that we're going to target. That's really going to dictate kind of what your approach should be, because some species are more easier to control than others. But if we look back historically, Lyndsey, like in the province of Ontario, if you look at the top 5 bad weeds, it hasn't really changed a whole lot. Lamb's quarters continues to be, not only the most abundant species in the province, but the one that usually gives producers grief in terms of performance with herbicides. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. So I guess we can go to the first slide that I have, because there's a number of different things to point out in that slide. So here's just on the screen a picture in the middle there of lamb's quarters, and I've just pulled the leaves off that, mainly just to show, as it gets bigger, it of course has more stems and axillary buds, and if we're dealing with contact herbicides, we need to get product to every one of those axillary buds because they represent potential for regrowth, right? So, as the plant gets bigger, there's more axillary buds, there's more that we need to cover, first and foremost. If we look at the top of that lamb's quarters plant, those surfaces are typically very difficult to wet, to get a droplet to stick and penetrate and absorb into the epicuticular waxes. So, on the left there in that black and white drawing, I stumbled across an old book I had from Sandoz, which I think is now BASF. And it had all these beautiful kind of microscopic photos of leaf surfaces, and then kind of, how the impact of surfactants on droplet coverage on the leaf surface. So what you're seeing in that microscopic photo at the top is is the leaf surface of lamb's quarters, which we all know to be kind of mealy and grainy. That in itself poses a difficult to wet surface, as shown in the kind of schematic below, where a droplet of water pretty much has full retention. And if you were to drop little droplets of water on a lamb's quarters leaves, it just rolls off. Like it just crowd surfs off the top of all those little granular surface. You add a surfactant, you get more leaf coverage. So it's a difficult to wet leaf. It grows relatively quickly, so there's more axillary buds to hit. You'll notice the leaf angle at the top as it gets dark, right? Like during the day, those leaves are more or less perpendicular to the surface of the soil so that they can harvest as much sunlight. But as it gets darker, they angle up. And again, it's like a slide, easier to roll off. So the graph you see on the right there is just the impact of time of day of applying, 2 contact herbicides. So Liberty and Partner, where you need to get full coverage. And, as you get into the middle of the day, efficacy is maximized. And then as you get into the later parts of the day and the evening, in particular, control is dramatically reduced. A good part of that is ambient air temperature. If you have a nice warm noon hour sun, those epicuticular waxes are more viscous. The product is going to get into the plant better. The orientation of the leaf is more conducive to herbicide uptake. And it's just, you get better results with a contact herbicide. So time of day, it's controversial a little bit in that, it's easy for the civil servant to say it's the best time to spray is between the hours of 9 and 5, banker's hours, right? But, there's practical reasons why you dip on either end of that to reduce spray drift. But for systemic herbicides that move within the plant, the time of day effect doesn't matter as much. But for contact herbicides, especially in Ontario, where there's more interest in kind of glufosinate for the enlist soybean system, I think this is an important thing to keep in mind, that these products will work better in the heat of the day in high humidity environments. And so I think we need to be more mindful of that, especially in higher, again, the last thing I'll say, because now I feel like I'm rambling, and we have Tom who's smarter. So the value of scouting is to really assess those high risk fields versus less risk fields. So again, tons of weeds emerging early, high density. Those are high risk fields in terms of value, risk to management. So in those environments, we might want to do things that'll ensure a better control because the stakes are just higher. And so time of day might be one of those tools.
So, okay. So now to build off this, so producer Jay, please leave this up for just a bit. Although Tom, let us know if you want to switch to the one about with the sprayer and visual that we've got as well. But Mike shares some really good points about the actual structure of the plant surface, all of those sorts of things. Thinking about it from the sprayer angle, what from the spray pass portion then plays into this, either making it worse or potentially making it better? What can we do in the actual spray pass?
Yeah, let's leave this slide on. It's a really good one. We always look at what the most impactful things are that we might be able to do with an application. Might hit on the high points, I think. Rate remains in any study that we do, looking at, what effect does droplet size, water volume, and that have. Rate is still the most powerful. It has a higher likelihood of having a significant effect on your overall success than any of the other variables. I think probably a close second, and Liberty is a very good example of this, but there's a few others, is time of day. And the other ones are kind of the opposite. They're Reglone, Diquat, or for our American or Australian listeners, Paraquat, which is best applied, when the sun is low because of its mode of action. But basically, when we put together the time of day issue where we want to maximize efficacy, and we put that together with the need to be productive, in other words, get things done, we're in a bit of a conundrum because, as Mike already said, it tends to be a little breezy on the sunny afternoons where Liberty works the best. So, how do we deal with that? I think that is really the big conundrum. I really believe in the definition of agronomy being simple. It's basically means doing the right thing at the right time. And um, the right time is just so key. So the challenge that we have is how can you get everything done in even less time?
Mhm.
And especially if we later will eventually get there, look at the effect of travel speed on spray deposition, for example, where driving faster isn't the answer. It reduces the quality of the work. So we've looked to really logistics as being, it's application technology per se. It's actually not what we're here to talk about. It is logistics.
Right.
It's making sure you can get your spraying done at the right time. That means investing in tendering systems and fine-tuning the efficiency of everything else.
Mhm.
Um, Getting it, doing I guess a mediocre job at the right time is probably still better than doing a great job at the wrong time, right? Because there's all kinds of negative side effects. So I like starting off with the basics and just setting us up in the best possible way from the very beginning, and then fine tuning the rest.
Okay, so we will talk about travel speed for sure, but you bring up a really key point that we probably could do a whole show just on the tendering setups that we've seen. We've done interviews and videos of, because there is so much time that can be saved when we're talking logistics and making sure that we can transfer water, etc., really quickly and get back to the field to spray. It's a key point. So there are some resources that we have from there, and certainly something we'll touch on as well. Lots of great comments coming in though, so I want to cover some of them. Jason says adding to Mike's response, and with the number of generic products on the market now, especially with glyphosate and glufosinate, when and what adjuvants do we add? And then of course there's the impact of water volume. So let's separate water volume for a moment, because I think we probably will talk about water volume generally speaking overall when we talk about the effectiveness of some of these products. But the question of adjuvants or what else we add to the tank definitely comes up quite a bit. Mike, do you want to take a crack at this one first, as far as making the decision of adding something in addition to what you've already got in the tank?
Yeah, and so and it's good to have Tom here, because I usually have, on these things, I usually ahead of time go through a bunch of literature and see what's out there, and then ultimately I have more questions. But I think to Jason's point, there's a couple of things here, right? Like the challenge becomes, it's difficult to know maybe across a bunch of different generic products what inerts they have in them, what surfactant systems they have. Like that's maybe difficult to unpack because they might all be a little bit different. But like glufosinate in particular, like the primary adjuvant that is added is ammonium sulfate, and it's usually for the to improve the control, or at least get acceptable control of those more difficult to penetrate species. Lamb's quarters, velvet leaf are two that typically come to mind and that are labeled for such. So as a general rule, if you look in the literature, like ammonium sulfate is one of the adjuvants that can improve control of weak acid herbicides in particular. There's a couple of reasons for that. One might be they simply slow down the dissipation of the droplet on the leaf surface. The second is that they deal with hard water effects that can cause antagonism of certain molecules. But then you have to be careful, with other active ingredients. I think of dicamba, where you wouldn't want to add ammonium sulfate for risk of increased vapor drift. So, you know, the you know the appropriate thing to say is, of course, around adjuvants is, you know, refer to the label for any specific recommendations as it pertains to adjuvants. And then more importantly, on a label, what it tells you that you can't do. So, you look for wording on a label that says, do not mix with any other fertilizers, adjuvants, unless specified in this label, because that's kind of a red flag for maybe there being issues. But yeah, historically, when we look to improve control of contact herbicides, it's largely been with nitrogen-based adjuvants. And yeah, like I don't know what Tom is feeling on. Like we've done work with ammonium sulfate and glyphosate over the past 20 years. And I guess the most succinct way I can summarize that research is that you're often better just taking that same amount of money and using it to put more glyphosate on than to add ammonium sulfate. But I'm also happy to hear Tom's thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I don't mind that answer, because it is a kind of cost and efficiency, and the end result may well be the same. But there is a third thing that the fertilizers do, and in particular ammonium sulfate and also urea ammonium nitrate, UAN, or 2800, 3200 in the US in some cases. And that is the ammonium ion helps what we call ion trapping. And it's a phenomenon of the weak acid herbicides. Right. So it does help uptake of weak acid herbicides through membranes. And the way it works, if you'll indulge me for 30 seconds, is that typically in a plant cell, just after the cell wall, we're in an acidic environment, just on the outside of the membrane. And that's because there's a proton pump on the membrane that actively moves protons to the exterior. That means in the symplast, on the inside of the membrane, we have a higher, more alkaline environment. Now, this is how this affects weak acid herbicides. Weak acid herbicides are characterized by the fact that they have a carboxylic acid somewhere on their molecule, which has a pKa. A pKa means what is the pH at which this is protonated or deprotonated, and the pKa is the tipping point. In other words, if you have an acidic environment, in most cases, the weak acid is protonated, which means it is more oil soluble. And in an alkaline environment, carboxylic acid is deprotonated, which is now basically an ion, negative charge. That means on the outside of the membrane, with a proton pump active, we have an oily molecule that slips into the oily membrane quite easily and then goes to the symplast where the pH is higher. It becomes deprotonated, and there it can't go back out because now it's ionic. Therefore, that really helps the herbicides be translocated. This is a phenomenon. This is one of the bases of that translocation, and it is enhanced by the presence of the ammonium ion in a formulation. That's one of the reasons some herbicides have UAN as an adjuvant on the label, opposed to ammonium sulfate. But in both cases, it's the ammonium ion that actually is doing the heavy lifting here. So interestingly for me is that we don't hear much mention of ammonium sulfate on labels. And it is probably the most used adjuvant of them all, because it addresses the issue of water hardness and antagonism from even bicarbonates. And for example, the Canadian glyphosate label doesn't say anything about ammonium sulfate. The Canadian Liberty label, glufosinate label, doesn't say a word about ammonium sulfate, and yet both benefit from its addition. So there is a little bit of hearsay in the whole adjuvant world too, right? And Jason's question is good. We know the information isn't going to be on the label. We should follow the label, but we know there's something going on. What should we do? The general answer I got from John Nalawaya at North Dakota State, really the person who pioneered the work on hard water, was he recommended that people add ammonium sulfate because it was found to be generally beneficial to the weak ion herbicides. Now, we're not there. I don't think we're at the point where we're going to make that general recommendation, but I think it's an interesting one to just to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so far I've written down a proton pump, which is a great name for a band, Tom, so write that down. And I've tried to spell the word, Mike, of what kind of wax is it again?
Epicuticular?
Oh yeah, cuticular. Okay, you made that up, but cool. I like putting it together. I like making up words too, Mike. It's fine. Okay, so we've got some great questions about spray volume and impacts as well, and we've got some time of day follow-ups. But let's go to producer Jay, if you would. We'll go to our clip with Rob Miller with BASF, with his Soybean School, talking about a few different aspects of the spray pass. But he ends off mentioning water volume. So we'll go to that and come back to some of these questions right after this.
Let's talk about, I guess, some best management practices here. I'm looking around. We got a lot of dandelion hiding here under trash. We got a lot of fleabane hiding under trash. I guess water volume is going to be a big point.
Yes, definitely. So in this field, we have a lot of corn residue, heavy corn residue. We start to see some of the weeds emerging on that. Number one rule, regardless of the chemistry that you're using, whether it's Kicksoar technology, dicamba, or 2,4-D, higher water volumes. Coverage is key, especially on some of these larger weeds. Or if we are delayed by 2-3 weeks, like I said earlier, some of these weeds have actually doubled in size already. Get them when they're smaller, actively growing, and larger weeds, larger surface area. Coverage is key. 20 gallons per acre.
What about, I guess, a two-pass program here this year? I mean, you might get a chance to get in early, and you may have to come back late.
Yes, definitely. So it's best to do use multiple effective modes of action, especially at planting. Allow the beans to get off to the best start possible, similar to what we talked about in corn. And then also come back in using, maybe just cleaning it up using a soil applied residual herbicide up front, and then doing that one pass in crop herbicide option to control any future escapes as well.
Hey, final point, and a big point. I'm walking around here and a lot of volunteer corn. I think we're probably going to see some issues with that this year. How do you tackle it?
Yeah, definitely. So with the challenges that we had in the corn crop with Dawn, we changed a lot of our combine settings last fall. We're going to have a lot more volunteer corn this year. Might even come in a little bit earlier, depending on what the spring holds. Number one rule is we do see some antagonism with some of the group 4 herbicides, such as dicamba with the group 1s on that volunteer corn and on weed control in general. So let's control some of these winter annuals and perennial weeds now and split that application and come back in with the volunteer corn option, whether it's right after planting or early post-emerge as well in soybeans.
Right.
Thank you to our show sponsors, Mind Your Farm Business, FMC Pre-School, and the Wheat School. From varietal advancements, protein and yield management, precision farming, and on to marketing, Real Agriculture's Wheat School is a video series tackling every facet of the wheat growing season in an engaging and informative format. The Wheat School is made possible through C&M Seeds and Bayer Crop Science. Learn more at wheatschool.com. Okay, all right. I did want to send just a quick shout out. Next week's episode of the Agronomists is going to be on the Great Lakes Yen project, and Peter Johnson is going to be the host. And unfortunately, I won't be here to make fun of him for starting late and possibly not answering people's questions. So I hope everyone following along in the comments will. I am headed to San Antonio, Texas next week for CattleCon. So yeehaw, everybody. Okay, let's get back to it. Great question here. So Mark's got a couple, and Warren, we will get to yours about spraying at night and heavy dews, because I've had that question come in too. But Mark says, okay, if wait and see approach to weed control, let's say that's the approach we're taking, some of the early germinating weeds may get big, maybe too big. Do I increase water volume to get more of the larger plant covered to increase the amount of chem in them? Tom, I'll go to you first on this one. Larger, do we go higher water volumes because higher water volumes are the best ever for everything? Or is there actually a reason why if the weeds are too large, it's even more important?
Well, water volume controls really two main things in my view. The one that it does, the first effect it has is it dilutes the concentration of anything that's in the tank. So the herbicide at any given rate applied in more water will be less concentrated. That can negatively affect the efficacy of some products. They just simply aren't there in high enough concentration to have the driving force needed for proper and efficient uptake. And the best example, again, is glyphosate, one of our most used herbicides. It just simply benefits from having a concentrated amount of active ingredient in there that gives you that diffusion, because they're taken up through the cuticle by diffusion, and concentration gradient is the driving force of diffusion. There's also another sort of observation that we see from time to time in the literature, and that is the traditional school of thought that contact products require high water volumes has sometimes been contradicted by the literature, where low water volumes actually are also working very well. And that often comes into play when the herbicide rate is maybe a little bit lower than, it's possible that they're using a lower rate for a certain weed spectrum that they're after. But the reason is thought to be that they haven't reached the concentration needed for that driving force I just mentioned. So we occasionally see, even with Liberty, that more water has a point beyond which give you any more advantages, and it just starts to go downhill from there. And we've even seen it with diquat and paraquat in some occasions. But again, it's rate-dependent effect. At higher rates, I don't expect that effect to be very pronounced. So that's one thing that water volume does. Lyndsey, I see you wanting to say something.
Yes, because this is where I want to throw in, because Jason, very clever, Western Canada, it's dry. We have to talk about delta T. Can we mention delta T and because we do need to think about how long these droplets actually exist on the plant, right? So where does water volume come into that?
Yeah, so maybe to finish that thought, the second benefit of a higher water volume is it affords you the opportunity to use those larger droplets that are more resistant to evaporation. They take longer to evaporate, basically at any given delta T, or delta T is really a synonym for the evaporation potential in any given environment. The higher the delta T, the faster the droplet is likely to evaporate. Yeah, larger droplets are a benefit there. And of course, larger water volumes give you that insurance. And, Mike, you also mentioned the humectant effect of something like a fertilizer, which could be of value there as well.
Okay, so Mike, same question. If weeds are getting away on us, is water volume going to be one of the key areas, or are there other things we potentially could be looking at?
No, I think Tom hit most of the high points. And I think practically speaking, if you look, at least I'll speak for Eastern Canada, when you look at a lot of the common herbicide labels, they really specify a range of 100 to 200 liters per hectare or 10 to 20 gallons per acre, right, in terms of water volume. And I think to Tom's point, there's certain products, and glyphosate is one of them, that would probably benefit from being at that 10 gallon per acre range or 100 liter per hectare range for more concentrated droplets. But if you're in a burn down situation and are mixing with a product that is more of a contact, so glyphosate plus saflufenicel, the active ingredient in Aragon or heat, that's probably where you want to be at 200 liters per hectare or 20 gallons per acre, right? So I think you toggle water volume based on product and kind of which one is going to be most greatly affected. And I mean, I'm being a little bit redundant. It's always interesting, kind of the stuff you find on labels that you didn't know existed. Like the Ingenia label, I found to tie in our discussion around water quality and water hardness earlier. Like there's a statement for pre-plant applications of dicamba and no-till systems that you lower your water volume if your water hardness is over a certain level. And that speaks to, smaller, lower water volume, you're going to have less of that antagonistic action of the divalent cations in hard water with the active ingredient. So, I think you can toggle to low and high water volumes within the range, but based on product.
Okay. Tom, I think our Western sensibilities of low and high water volumes are slightly different than our Eastern sensibilities, are they not? What would be considered high water volume in say a Manitoba or a Saskatchewan context?
Well, I mean, we really see three water volumes that are sort of in the the average spray operator's vocabulary, shall we say. we're still talking about a 5 US for glyphosate, which is, of course, I think it's disappearing because we're really rarely spraying glyphosate by itself, and almost all the tank mix partners, such as saflufenisol, do benefit from higher water volumes, and they have to be watched for. So we go to higher water volumes with glyphosate. But 10 is your typical in crop, and almost all Western labels are 10 US for an in crop application. 15 is your fungicide, and we do see it sometimes at 20 for very specific needs, very high density. High value crops might see a 20 gallon per acre, but that's what we would call quite high. We very rarely see anything higher. But an interesting point comes up, and that is the use of pulse width modulation. We have been seeing a higher incidence of damage to the plunger inside of a PWM valve in the lower water volume regions of North America, particularly when it comes to SC fungicides. So the tiny granules that are still present as a carrier in those fungicides can become a problem and create abrasion or some kind of resistance to movement of the plunger. And the regions that have a higher water volume environment, 10, 15 to 20 gallons or even more for the fungicides, simply do not have the same problems. So there's even mechanical reasons to use more water. But it always comes down to this logistics thing. I mean, admittedly, our sprayers are bigger than ever. The 1,600 gallon tank sprayers are the ones that are really small. There's even 2,000 and more gallon sprayer tanks from European manufacturers of all places. But we still are very reluctant to just use a lot of water because we have to cover so much ground. So there will always be that practical kind of a limitation on it.
So, and Warren Schneckenberger shared, he got some ideas from an OSCAA meeting that did shave off some time on the refill, and says, and comments, 5 to 10 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but in reality, it turned into an extra tank a day. So that's just it. You save small amounts of time, and they really do add up to potentially covering a lot more acres in a day, which is pretty fantastic.
And yes, I agree with Warren on this completely. And what is a tank? A tank is 160 acres if you're applying it at 10 gallons per acre.
That's right.
That's a big chunk of land. And the story or the analogy I try to make is, what if you're trying to beat the clock here against a low pressure system that's coming in, that will bring rain, that will keep you out of the land for a few days? What is the value of getting that other field sprayed before that rain? What happens to that field in the 5 intervening days? What is your yield loss on that? How big are the weeds? Is it a recoverable situation with a later spray application? Will the same herbicide rate still work well because the weeds are bigger? So there's actually quite a lot of doing it on time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that brings us to the question. Aside from ground applied products pre-emerge, is there any argument to spraying late into the night when the dew is heavy? Mike, I'm going to go to you on this one first. Should we park when the sun goes down? So this comes into that time of day question. Also comes into the efficiency question as to how many acres you need to cover in a day. But what impact would a heavy dew have? Do we drive on or do we wait?
I think, well, I would wait. I don't think that much good happens from applying when it's super dewy. I think it increases the risk of just runoff on the leaf. Higher humidity is helpful after application in terms of the droplet not dissipating as quickly. I will say, probably, if you looked in the literature, and I didn't look this up, so it's not fresh in my mind, but I remember, because it is a question that comes up every year, do you wait off on applying in the dew? Because you can physically see the dew droplets running off the leaf and going, well, won't the spray droplet go there as well? And I seem to recall it had very little to no effect. And so I've just contradicted myself in the last 30 seconds. But I think as a general rule, the issue more with parking the sprayer in the evening is and even then I don't think anyone can definitively say, but it leads more to just a lower ambient air temperature, and that just not being helpful for uptake in the first few hours, which is the most important typically.
Okay. All right. I do want to talk about, Tom, I do want to talk about travel speed and so let's touch on this for a moment. So we talked about obviously the efficacy is really what drives. I mean, why are we bothering if it's not going to work, right? At the same time, if we're always striving for perfect, that's not realistic because we have ground to cover, we have weather to contend with, etc. So if we're looking to try and save time, Tom, I'm just going to drive faster. Why is that maybe not the best idea?
Can I interrupt?
Oh, of course you may. Of all times.
I've purposely not asked Tom this ahead of time, so this is maybe unfair to Tom. But I
Perfect.
would have thought that a lower travel speed, if I think about how we do plot spraying, we're 5 kilometers an hour, like less than 3 miles per hour, pretty high volumes. I thought that would be good compared to maybe 20 miles per hour. And I've come across a couple of papers recently where they tested that, and it didn't seem to have any difference. And in fact, might have even numerically improved control a bit at higher speeds. And I was surprised by that. And it was against their null hypothesis. I guess, what say you, Tom Wolf? Because that was a shocker to me. I would have said slow and steady wins the race, but apparently it's all about pace.
Well, you really got me there, Mike, because it does contradict everything that we think we know about the travel speed effect. I think the two things we see usually with travel speed is that two very important things happen. The first one is that the spray plume does get entrained from the spray cloud that is projected downwards by the nozzle, and the fine droplets are essentially, sucked out, for lack of a better word, out of that downward movement. And as a result of that, they become the drifting spray plume behind the sprayer boom, and they are prone to anything that the weather decides to do with them, basically. So inversions are going to grab those, linger them around, or wind will, or for that matter, mechanical turbulence they're also much more subject to that as well, which also can extend, the effects of which can extend 10, 20, 30 meters behind the sprayer itself. So I see that as being a negative. The second big negative is, in fact, the turbulence. And, I just haven't seen a positive spin on this before. I suppose the one thing, there was a thing in Australia, there's a fellow named Jeff Furness in Australia who in the 80s and 90s worked on a buff plate sprayer. This was a sprayer that used a low water volume and used a series of basically, blockages, like they were basically just veins and things that created a very turbulent environment behind the sprayer boom on purpose. And the idea was to then have a turbulent deposition of the spray cloud and get more retention and deposition that way, and more areas of the plant covered. And he published a number of papers where that approach was surprisingly successful. And so I have a small weak spot for this, to be quite honest. I mean, we also see it, for example, the incredibly turbulent deposition that we so much frown upon with spray drones. Good. And yet spray drones seem to work. So Jason DeVoe and I have recently done a study just in Simcoe just a few months ago where we try to characterize the turbulence and take it into account. And in fact, when we took the turbulence into account for this particular study, we found that it explains why, to some degree at least, why the drones might be working better than we thought they should. So I want to leave it out there. At least I want to leave a thread of hope to those who are advocates of high turbulence spraying, that there is some evidence that it has value. But Jay, maybe and Lyndsey, maybe we can the graph up of that is slide 1, and it shows just example. This is one replicate. This is a John Deere R4045. We're driving into the screen and the wind is from the left. And it's about a 15 to 20 kilometer per hour wind that day. We drove 15 miles an hour. The boom was 35 inches off the ground. We used an extremely coarse spray, the ULD, at 60 PSI. And look at how beautiful that deposition is. Look at how even it is across the width of the boom. Look at how there are no wheel tracks evident in terms of low points of the deposition. This is just one rep. The other two reps don't look much better. They look different, but they don't look better. And this we did in this context about 35 times. We did 35 different runs on various, speeds and boom heights and spray qualities. Usually with the John Deere R4045. And I can only attribute this to travel speed. I can only say, look at the size of the equipment, the trusses on the boom, the hinge points, the wheels, displays air. And because the spray follows the air, if there's small droplets, also displaces them. So it looks much worse than I thought. The faint lines you can see, the 100%, that's the dashed line. That's the average of the whole thing across. And then the other lines, plus or minus 15%. We traditionally view plus or minus 15% as an acceptable variance from the mean in spray application. So clearly, you can see why I wasn't super happy with this result. And to be quite honest, when we did slow down and we did lower the boom, it got better, but it didn't get a lot better. So some of it is just symptomatic of how we're spraying, the equipment we're using, and the conditions in which we spray. So it's a bit of a combination of a lot of different effects. Now, if we can go to the next slide.
Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
No, that's good.
Lyndsey,
That's
why don't you ask the question?
Well, just there's a lot of questions. So as we're talking about this, Tom, if we can, a lot of sort of people chiming in on, but we do apply by plane. We do apply by helicopter. Do they do a good job? So let's walk through this, but let's think about, we use them. We have, things that are registered for use in these. Sometimes they are the best option as far as, trampling crop, etc. But do they do as good of a job or better than a high clearance sprayer? So just those are some of the questions that are coming in. Yes, we can use them, but do they really do a great job? Yeah.
Those are super questions. We'll get there. Look at this one. This is the coefficient of variation measured using the same method. It was actually a string method. And this is now with a 4830. And we did 3 speeds. You can see them there. And we pinned it. The 4830 was, governor limited at 20 miles an hour. But we did 2 boom height. What we thought was reasonably low and what we thought was maybe a little too high. You can see that the height obviously matters, but look at the speed. Once we get above the, what is that, 14, was it? I don't even remember. Things start at some, right? And the coefficient of variation got worse. And so speed, I think, is a problem that we ought to be very mindful of. And I really just wanted to drive the point home. Now, let's get to the aerial application part head on, because we have looked at a fair number of patterns over the years from aircraft, and they are not quite as good, if good is the good descriptor, as the ground sprayer. Or maybe I should say the ground sprayer not much better, than the aerial sprayer. They're inherently variable because they're subject to displacement by, the aerodynamic forces that happen in an aircraft. There's an undercarriage, there's props, there's boom gantries, there's all kinds of things hang off the bottom of a fuselage. And so there is going to be some variability. They also spray typically in a side wind, or try to, and that does distort the spray pattern the way it lands as well. But I want to say this, the aerial applicators are trained professionals. Okay, they go to aerial applicator school. It's not an easy school to go to. There's one in North Battleford. Frantic Cock runs it. Most of the applicators in Canada go through that school. And so they take this very seriously. They also have a professional organization, the Canadian Aerial Applicators Association. In the US, the National Aerial Applicators Association. They meet annually. and they put their heads together and discuss technical challenges and innovations. So I respect them, and I think that a well-trained applicator is going to do what they can within the limits of the technology. But let's get back to a point we made at the beginning of the broadcast, and that is the right time. Timeliness is so essential in business. Aircraft, in many cases, can do it when the ground sprayer can't, for soil moisture reasons or others. So I value them quite highly. But I want to just maybe go to the next slide if we can, which is the drone pattern. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a pretty darn good drone pattern. Okay. So this is a single pass with the T50, the best-selling drone in Canada at the moment. We're using a commercial droplet size, 250 microns. That's a very common setting. We're flying 3 meters high at 18 miles per hour, not quite pinned. It flies faster. 3 and this is just one of, we always did 3 reps. I just chose one to show. And if I had shown the other 2 reps, you would have seen the peaks and valleys in different places. And you would also have seen the overall location of the general curve to be shifted slightly to the left or to the right of that sort of somewhat central location we have now. So these are the aircraft that actually have a serious problem with uniformity, and those are the ones that I would be more worried about. Do aircraft do a good job? They seem to, absolutely. We've done side-by-side comparisons of fungicides with fixed-wing aircraft, piloted aircraft, and ground sprayers, and they have come out statistically identical. You could nitpick, but for the most part, the fungicide worked. Now, there are some new uses of fungicides where some of the deficiencies of aerial application are becoming apparent, and the aerial applicators are aware of them and they're trying to correct them. I spoke with a group of applicators last week who said, is it tar spot? Is that the disease, Mike?
Yeah, on corn.
In corn,
Yep.
that leaves a fairly visible necrotic lesion on the leaf.
Yeah.
The aerial applicators as a group are finding that their width may not be sufficient for the job they need to do, and they're making adjustments to that or want to. So I think that's some of those things are becoming more evident as time goes on.
Johanna mentions, that question of the swath width. Say that 3 times fast. She can just type it, so it's fine. Versus efficiency. So, and that I think comes into this as well, right? It's something we haven't quite figured out with the drones yet, on spraying potentially, as far as how much turbulence we get, what that spray pattern looks like, how much overlap you need, accounting for it, etc. So it is, there's still lots to do on that one. But yes, to that point, when it comes to our aerial applications, sometimes it is the only option, in which case, I guess what's the consideration versus not doing a pass at all? That is always one. Okay, we have to just quickly, we're going to go to our last read of the night, and then we've got a couple more questions we'll try and get to before we run out of time here. So Producer Jay, if you would. Our sponsors of the Agronomists are the FMC Pre-School, the Wheat School, and Mind Your Farm Business. Are you interested in great information to help you mind your farm business? This podcast tackles big issues such as farm succession and transition, the buy versus lease decision, and leadership and development of farm leaders, all in a conversational, helpful format. Made possible by support from RBC Royal Bank, visit mindyourfarmbusiness.com or your favorite podcast platform. Producer Jay has a great sense of humor. In the guest chat, talking about my inability to say swath width. Also, I can't say tank mix partners very quickly. So there you go. And I have to for my job, actually, sometimes. Okay. All right. Questions about nozzles. So those are good ones, but I did want to just mention, because there were some really great comments in the chat, and Mike, maybe that's what you wanted to touch on. That question of spraying at night. For many, depending on where you live, daytime is very windy, so nighttime perhaps is more calm, and that sometimes makes the difference. So I mean, we do live in reality. We recognize that it can't always be perfect, but I guess that is the question. Would you rather spray at night if it meant it was calm?
Well, I mean, listen, like we can show those slides and say like this is the optimum time to do it, and I'll be the first to admit that I rarely abide by that guidance. If I was to err on one side, I'd rather spray in the morning, going into the warmth, from an efficacy standpoint versus going into the evening. So I think that's possibly one thing to look at. But again, maybe we're getting too caught up in details. There's really just a kind of a small handful of products that really are hindered by um, nighttime applications, and they're largely contact herbicides. So Reflex, Bazagran, Liberty, glufosinate, bromoxynil. But for the most part, if we're using systemic herbicides, there is an effect still, but it is marginal to nil, and and it matters less. And so, yeah, you get the work done when you get it done. Like ultimately, would I rather kind of goes back to what Tom said earlier, right? Like if the staging of the weed is optimal and it's small, I'd rather you spray it in suboptimal conditions than wait to perfect conditions and now it's 2 to 3 inches taller, right? And so that's kind of the fine line you toggle on that situation.
Mm-hmm. There are some questions about nozzles, but Mark, I'm going to ask if there's a specific, are you targeting a specific, is it weed, disease, what about tips, right? So because I don't know that you could ever generally say here, this one is the best. But Tom, so Mark, do you have a specific instance you're asking about nozzles? Though Tom, I will go to you. Do you have a favorite nozzle? And if so, what is it?
I do. And you'll never hear me identify it.
Oh.
I have a favorite spray quality. And
okay.
that spray quality is capital C coarse, which is the ASABE S572.2 category that's currently kind of in vogue. There's been a newer classification that changes that a little bit, but coarse. Why coarse? The nice thing is that anybody who makes a nozzle buys the spray qualities, the manufacturers, that their nozzles produce at various pressures and flow rates. And those spray qualities will, if they're the same spray qualities, they're approximately the same droplet size. Okay, they're not identical, but they're close enough. If you aim for a coarse spray quality and you have that spray quality in the middle of your pressure range, that gives you a little bit of leeway to change the spray quality should conditions require it. So for example, you need more coverage because you're spraying a grassy weed or have a contact mode of action, or you have just some more difficult conditions, increase the spray pressure. You can do that by driving just a wee bit faster. 10, 15 psi is all you need to have a pretty strong effect on droplet size. Conversely, boundary areas, wind conditions with drift slow down by about that 1 or 2 miles per hour, and the pressure will drop by 15 or more psi, and you have a coarser spray. So that's the reason I like the coarse spray quality. It's also actually not a bad overall efficiency spray. It's a general purpose spray. Most products will work acceptably with a coarse, and it gives you a relatively wide window of operation. And so, as we're moving towards pulse width, I would say the generic answer that I prefer, an air-induced nozzle, low pressure air-induced nozzle isn't really adequate anymore, because most people are now using a PWM compatible nozzle, which will likely not, it can be, but likely not will be air induced. And so it's become a little bit more challenging to find those nozzles, but people are managing. So I think coarse is still your go-to spray quality, in my opinion.
Mike, do you have a favorite nozzle for when it comes to killing those nasty weeds? Or would you rather just focus on the right product, the right rate, the right time?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should have a sexier answer than I do. I kind of, to me, it's about just having good coverage. I don't know. So you can tell by my stammering that clearly I don't care as much. I go back to what Tom says. It's more around kind of droplet size, and again, the label dictates a little bit. Where some of the contact products that we talked about kind of specify a medium droplet classification. There's other products that are coarse. Um, Again, I'd rather see kind of not so fast sprayer, reasonable water volume for the product being used, and timing for when weeds are smaller. Ideally, having a soil applied herbicide, so we take some out to begin with, so that second pass isn't as critical. That that's a long way to say no. I don't have a favorite nozzle.
Okay. Well, for next
Yeah.
time, Mike, if you could come up with that would be
Yeah.
great. I don't, unless there's a blue one. I picked the blue one. It goes with my eyes. Okay. There's a reason I don't work in Tom and Mike's circles very often. Okay. So, but we're out of time. But Tom, I want to go on one last question with disease in mind. So fungicide in mind. We could talk tar spot or whether it's white mold. It certainly does seem with disease, though, we are talking coverage. Warren uses the belugas, the drop nozzles. What do we have to say there as far as your nozzle selection when it's diseases that you're after?
Almost without exception, water volume is your biggest hammer when it comes to disease control, and it's fairly simple. We have a large leaf area index at the crop stage where fungicides are usually applied, later season sprays. So in other words, you have more square inches of leaves and you only have so much water, and the only way to get droplets to those leaves is with more water. It's just a mathematical thing. The challenge will always remain that the canopy itself attenuates the spray quite a bit, so you get about a third of the way into a canopy, you have almost only half as much, and another third of the way in, it's only a quarter as much. It really goes down quick. And so what Warren's doing with the belugas is he's putting the spray where it needs to be with the drop nozzles and spraying out sideways towards the canopy without having it interfere. Something that you do in corn, you typically don't do it in a lot of other crops, but yeah, it is really all about water volume. Droplet size has typically not been as important with fungicides as the traditional theory has. When we've done studies with droplet size and fungicides, we found it to be secondary behind water volume. It's still important, but not as important. So getting it there, I think, is probably the number one priority, and then making sure it works when it gets there is secondary.
Just so you guys know, Francois Tardif says blue nozzles are the best, so I picked right. And I believe him. He's a very smart man. So that's what we're going with. Okay. One parting thought here, Mike, because it came up in Wheat Pete's words. So yes, you're welcome, Pete, about people looking for a particular publication. And you said, no, go to the crop protection hub. So Mike, this is your chance to plug that because I think it's important. So if you would.
Sure. Yeah. So the ministry has created digital tools for all our print publications. It's the Crop Protection Hub. We keep adding features to it to make it work better. We take your feedback seriously on that. So a couple of things that we've done to really kind of try and give you an experience similar to the old publications is you can customize your own efficacy table like we had at the beginning of every commodity chapter. So you can even pick the products that you want to compare and exclude all the others. And then you can create print views that are similar to the rates and precautions. So it's getting closer to the traditional book. So what it allows is a lot of customization. We're not bound by space. So instead of those rating tables only having 25 weed species, we now have over 80 weed species in the database with corresponding efficacy data. I do acknowledge that there's people in the province that don't have great access to internet or maybe don't. And so I'm also working on a curated kind of Cole's Notes print version for this spring as well. But the benefit of the digital resource is we're not limited by space, and so you can look up a lot more stuff than you could in the traditional print publication.
Mark, I can send you a link for that. But Mike, if you've got what is the web address for anyone listening?
Crop Protection Hub is what I would Google search.
There you
And
go.
so,
Yes.
yeah.
Ask the
And
Googler. Crop
yeah, that's the
Protection
Google
Hub.
machine.
Yeah, and it'll get there. Tom, people can, of course, find things at Sprayers 101, but where can they find you next? Where is your next adventure going to take you?
I'm in Winnipeg because Peter Sikkim is teaching the Herbicide Mode of Action course to a Western audience for the second time. He's taught that course, I think, about 16 times, mostly in the East, though. So I'll be part of the Tuesday contingent, and he's got a bunch of special guests Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday as well from all over. So look forward to this.
I'm going to assume that you are participating in that, but also an avid student. That's my assumption.
Absolutely. I'm all ears when Peter talks.
Yeah, absolutely. Aren't we all? Okay. All right. We're going to end it there. Tom, Mike, Cobra versus Wolf. Let me know in the comments who won. There you go. And yeah, I do appreciate
Come on.
I appreciate you both. We'll see you both very soon. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to leave it there. As I said, Peter Johnson's going to be your host next week, talk about the Great Lakes yen, but I will be back the week after that, of course, and the topic escapes me right now, but don't worry. Just head over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. You can check out this episode, all our past episodes. You can sign up for an email, and we'll let you know which ones are coming up and when. Thank you, of course, to my guests. That was a lot of fun, and it's always fun when I learn new words. So there you go. And if anybody wants it, that was Proton Pump. That's the name of the new band we're going to start. Okay. Cheers, everybody. We'll see you next week.